Good evening. I'd like to welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of May 22nd, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciak, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Carter. Mr. Young. Mr. Walters. Here. Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Hubick.
I would like to excuse both council members Young and Carter. Carter may show up later, but just to be safe, let's excuse him.
Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Hubick, second by Ms. Cleland McGrath to excuse Mr. Young and Mr. Carter, although we may see Mr. Carter join us late. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. On to, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, we're on to item 3, which is announcements and committee reports, and I have quite a few announcements, and I'll try to keep them straight. Just announced there was a wonderful graduation of the Volunteer Firefighters Academy that happened on Friday here in City Hall. But what that is was a Volunteer Firefighters Academy that was developed by Assistant Fire Chief Burbank and open to nearby agencies, specifically Fire District 11 and 13, as well as our mutual aid partners. There were 4 from Fire District 13, 3 from Fire District 11, and 7 for the Anacortes volunteer folks, and 13 successfully completed the academy. So that's 7 new volunteer firefighters for the city of Anacortes. It was a 16-week class. The idea was to improve interoperability for the fire departments of Fidalgo Island, uniform operations, and reinforce best practices ensuring success and continued firefighter safety. Second announcement is great to see a number of folks, including Councilmember Cleland McGrath at the library. New remodeled children's space, so thanks to the Maxons for their support of that space. I know the tugboat is yet to come, and I needed a lot of help from the kids to do the scavenger hunt. Let's see, next. We had a council and director retreat last week on Tuesday the 16th. I know I enjoyed it and appreciate the council participation. Hopefully it's kicked us off in the correct direction as we move forward to develop next year's budget priorities. So that happened on Tuesday of last week. And Blake decision on that same day, if you didn't know, the state legislature convened for a special session for the first time in I think 6 years to work on what we refer to as the Blake Fix. Governor signed the bill into law on the 16th, and it will become effective on 1 July 2023. I'm going to highlight just a couple of pieces of that. Gross misdemeanor for knowing possession, knowing use, covers fentanyl, opioids, methamphetamines, heroin, cocaine, and other hard drugs. Limits the max penalty for individuals' first 2 convictions to 180 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Beginning with 3rd conviction, individual may be sentenced up to 364 days. Law enforcement prosecuting attorneys are encouraged to offer referral to treatment in lieu of prosecution. Establishes a pretrial diversion program, including therapeutic courts, community courts, traditional criminal pathways. Preempts local governments from adopting or enforcing our own ordinances. And I will have our city attorney correct me on any big items, but the big thing is, obviously we brought appreciate council bringing a ordinance that we looked at last week or the week before, but we will not be pursuing that. However, we will see next week some updates to Title IX. Is that correct, Ms. Swetnam? Okay, so we'll look for that because we'll have to start incorporating the impacts of that one. All right, so halfway through my announcements, sorry. Let's see, next on the announcements, number 5. Public Works Department will be hosting an open house on the 1st of June, and that is going to be from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. wastewater treatment plant. Just a couple more to go. Washington State Fairs is hosting their spring 2023 virtual community meeting series. They hold 6 virtual public meetings focused on both route-specific and key topics such as proposed fare changes and Washington State Ferries service restoration plan. They'll start at 6 p.m., brief presentation, and then most of the meeting will be devoted to answering questions from participants. Attendees will also have the opportunity to provide written public comment. And the meeting for the San Juan Islands Anacortes run is Wednesday, the 31st. You can find more info about this posted on our website and a link to registration. A couple more to go. Public Works Open House, I mentioned that one. And I think I'm almost done. Oh, just a reminder, it is Memorial Day is this weekend, the official kickoff to summer, but also an opportunity to reflect those who have sacrificed. And you can find on our website a link to a newly updated by our museum that links to memorials in Anacortes. So it's really well done. So thanks to the museum staff for putting that together. And that also is a reminder that that leads to the 5th. It would be our 5th Tuesday or our 5th meeting of the month, so there will not be a City Council meeting until the 5th of June. Okay, that's really done with all of my announcements. And over to Planning Committee. Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. We had a lively planning committee meeting at 5 p.m. today. Council members Cleland, McGrath, Walters, and I, with Planner Libby Grage and Planning Director John Coleman. We didn't get to the end of our agenda, so we look forward to our next meeting already. We talked briefly about the short-term rentals, the moratorium on short-term rentals that's in our packet tonight. We discussed publishing our comp plan. That's code publishing for plans. It's something that will cost the city money, but not a ton as far as we know. But we're looking into it because it would be a way to have that very easily accessible for the public and especially as we're approaching our update in 2025. We talked about coming up with a sub-area plan for Sharps Corner and what that would look like, the city-owned property that could potentially be a site for housing, which we desperately need. And we also talked about housing in the comp plan. So every jurisdiction is assigned numbers that we are supposed to be able to have housing for over the course of however many years. So those numbers come down from the state. We don't know what they are yet, how many we are expected to absorb. Anacortes has grown 10% over the last 10 years, which is actually pretty low compared to a lot of our neighboring jurisdictions. And we will find out how many are expected to move to our area. And then we not only have to plan to have housing available for that number of people, as is traditional, but also the legislature has broken that number down into different income brackets. So not only do we have to plan to absorb people, but we have to plan to absorb people based on different income demographics too, which is going to be tricky. So what that requires is for us to find out what our units are priced at now and who they are accessible to, and how we will plan for that going forward. So that actually will likely require the services of a consultant, and there is funding potentially available for that through the Department of Commerce, so we'll be pursuing that, but very important for planning ahead, especially since housing is already an emergency. So we'll be working on that. Thanks.
Yeah, and as our new planning director is settling in, they're also going to be working hard to decipher all of the impacts of the legislation coming down, and appreciate that work, because I know we'll all be working to figure that part out. Okay, on to 3B, Parks and Recreation Committee report.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Hubick.
Thank you. Parks Department, staff and Councilmember Moulton and I met back on the 17th. Also just a very lively discussion. Lots of good stuff happening on with the Parks and Recs departments. One of the things we touched on was the skate park. Didn't spend a whole lot of time on that because it's in our council packets tonight. We got an update on the Washington Park restroom project and how it's not quite going as smoothly as we'd like. There are some sewer issues, so they are working with the civil engineering folks to see if there's a different place that we can place that. There is also in case you didn't know, there's a Friends of the Forest Ambassador program. This is a volunteer-based program where folks will go out on Saturdays, sit at some of the trailheads and have a little clicker, and they count people as they come into the parks. It's a very old-fashioned, very analog way, but it's a fun way too to kind of get to know some of your neighbors in town and just see who's coming in, some questions that people have, what they need for us out in the parks. So if you're interested, email any one of us for a little bit more information. We'll put you in touch with staff or just look on the Friends of the Forest website. We also got an update on the hiring that is still happening. Some folks are behind on mowing just around the city. We understand that staffing is a challenge again this year. Ramping up activities. There are tons of different leagues happening out in the town. One of the things that's really exciting this year is that we get to host the state Little League tournament that's happening in late July. So this is a super big deal. There's about 16 teams coming from across the entire state, which means 16 schools worth of families and stuff like, oh wait, Little League's not school. Anyways, but there's like 16 gigantic groups of families and youth teams that are coming in. So we're super excited about that. Staff has also worked with the chamber to get hanging baskets up as of last Monday. We got an update on the senior center and a lot of the good work that's going on there around capital improvements to the outdoor space and to other volunteer opportunities that may be available for folks who are interested there. We also double-checked to see if the senior center was going to be used as a cooling station. Again, possibly this summer. It was used a couple of times last year. We probably could have used it last Monday when it was nice and warm. There is air conditioning in some parts of the building, but not the entire building. So probably on our next couple of meetings, we'll be having conversations around capital improvement projects there. And yeah, also just like I said earlier, there's a ton of events coming back as well as leagues. We'll be seeing Bark in the Park again, Kids Are Best Fests, and tons of classes and day events. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements, committee reports that I might have missed? All right, we're on to item number 4. It's public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public that wishes to address City Council on anything that is not on our agenda tonight. So if you're here for the public hearing on the short-term rental moratorium, we'll get to that at item 6. But if you want to address the council on anything else that's not on the agenda, this would be the time. And I don't think I had anybody signed up. Okay. So we will move on to our consent agenda, items 5A, B, and C. And council.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve consent agenda items 5A through C.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Ms. Hubick to approve consent agenda items A, B, and C. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Now we're on to item 6. This is a public hearing. It's a public hearing on interim ordinance 4046 regarding a moratorium on short-term rental of residential dwelling units in certain mixed-use zones. And Ms. Grange, I think you're going to present this, and you'll tell us what those mixed-use zones are, I'm sure, and then we're ready to take public comment. Ms. Grange.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Libby Grange with the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. And I'm going to try and pull this close to me so everyone can hear. This evening we are here to have a public hearing on interim ordinance 4046. The City Council adopted Ordinance 4046 on March 27th, 2023, and it is a moratorium on the acceptance of any land use, building permit, or business license application for any use constituting rental of lodging for a period less than 30 days, or establishment of any such use within a residential dwelling unit within the commercial central business district, marine mixed use, and commercial marine zones. So the statute that authorizes the city to enact the moratorium does require that a public hearing be held within 60 days of adoption of the moratorium, and so that's why we are here this evening. There's also a related item on the agenda, number 6B, coming right after this one, which is a public hearing on Ordinance 4052. So overnight lodging is defined as rental of lodging for a period of less than 30 days, and that's in our Anacortes Municipal Code. The subject moratorium under Ordinance 4046 would affect residential dwellings only, and those would be in, the areas affected are the commercial, CBD, MMU, and commercial marine zones. The Ordinance 4046 has an initial term of 6 months. This is a map that shows the areas where the moratorium applies. So the CBD zone, commercial is the green area here, marine mixed use out along the waterfront and out in Skyline, and then some commercial marine areas down by the ferry and over along Fidalgo Bay. So just a little bit of background about the moratorium. Both residential development and overnight uses are allowed within the subject zones. Overnight lodging uses are allowed within the CBD, commercial, marine mixed use, and commercial marine zones. And recently, the city has seen quite a bit of residential development in the form of townhomes and apartment buildings that have occurred over the last couple of years, and we've seen some of those units being converted into short-term overnight lodging. So we've gotten feedback from members of the community about concerns regarding that, and there are also concerns about the conversion to overnight lodging uses undermining the housing goals that Anacortes community has in our comprehensive plan. So the City Council Planning Committee recommended Ordinance 4046 to pause acceptance of such applications while policy options can be considered and regulations developed. So at this point, I'll pause and suggest that the public hearing be held.
Okay, so this is the public hearing, and this is where we'll invite members of the public to come up and address the council on this. I know just today the council received 2 written comments from 2 members of the public. I know it went to all your emails, but I think at least one of them is printed out here. So we'll make sure to enter that in the record. But any member of the public that we're ready to talk to council on this issue? Okay, I don't see anybody online that's raised your hand if you want to address the council on this issue. Okay, and I think that moving forward, we leave the public hearing open is the plan, or do we have to have 2 readings on this?
I think on this one, we could close the public hearing. We have another.
Oh, because we're on a timeline, right?
Correct.
Okay, so, all right, going once, going twice, I will close the public hearing on Ordinance 4046 and turn it over to council then for discussion. Mr. Walters.
We already adopted 4046, so there's nothing more for us to do on that item,
Okay.
right? Because we're proposing to take the next ordinance public hearing on. A little confusing, but yeah. So we should proceed to the next public hearing.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to item 6B. Sorry, no objections. Moving on to item 6B, which is a public hearing on proposed interim ordinance 4052, extending the moratorium adopted in the 4046 and adopting a work plan. So, yeah, that's a little more clear about what we're doing. All right, anything you want to add to this one, Ms. Grange?
Yeah, sorry about that confusion. No, not much other than, yes, proposed ordinance 4052 would adopt a work plan, which is included as attachment A to the draft ordinance, and also would extend the moratorium adopted to 1 year, which would end on March 27th, 2024. And this is just a screenshot of the proposed work plan, which would begin today and has city staff doing some research, finding out what council's intended outcomes would be for any policy or code amendment proposals, doing research on best practices, and drafting some preliminary code amendments. And then city staff would come back to city council with a preliminary draft for council feedback and informal public comments. We would integrate council and public comment into the draft proposal, bring it to Planning Commission for workshops with Planning Commission and public hearing, and finally recommendation by Planning Commission back to the City Council. And so our work plan has us ending up in the February-March timeframe with those final recommendations to Council, and at that point, they could be adopted if Council so chose. So that's all I have on that.
Oh, okay. All right, so the recommended actions are hold a public hearing. That's what we're doing on this one. And I think just for the members of the public to clarify, the moratorium that went into place on the 27th of March does not affect anybody who currently has short-term rentals.
That's correct. If somebody has a short-term rental that went through the applicable approval and licensing process with the city, then those can continue.
Okay.
That use.
All right, so now any members of the public wishing to address the council on this ordinance 4052 and the work plan? Okay, are you recommending that I close the public hearing and get to the council discussion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Going once, and I do have a hand up. Okay, so I was paying attention. So if you can make sure. Yep. Go ahead. Please state your name and where you live, and we'll go ahead and let you make your comment.
Hello, my name is Jason Gold. I'm a designated managing broker with Realty Real Estate. I sent in an email this morning. I wanted to make sure that got read during this meeting.
Yeah, and Mr. Gould, I'll let you know because I think you weren't on before. We did receive 2 written comments, and yours is one of those comments that have been entered into the record, and all of council has received that, at least via email.
Okay. I just wanted to point out that this measure should not be extended because there is only about 20 Airbnb short-term rentals even listed in the commercial zones, and 70 roughly Airbnbs in all of Anacortes currently. These are detrimental to homeowners buying and selling, needing a place temporarily to stay, travel nurses, refinery workers, all having a temporary housing while they're in intermediate transition. It's important to have a healthy housing mix in Anacortes, and I was doing some research. There's actually more vacant homes in Anacortes than Airbnbs. If the city council wants to alleviate housing issues, I think it would be figuring out a way how to get these vacant homes available to the public, or charging a tax or something to stop people from just hoarding homes that are vacant. There's concerns about health and safety with these short-term rentals. I do not believe in my 12 years of managing short-term rentals, mixed-term housing, that there is any type of issue with health or any type of would cause an emergency order. In my letter, I detail very thoroughly a lot of information that should help the council to realize that this is an unnecessary moratorium, and it should be lifted immediately to help builders. The council says that the main issue is there's a complex that was built that has been on the market for over a year, and 9 of those units still cannot sell on the current market without the builder taking a major loss. We stepped in to help this builder rent these units and provide housing to Island Hospital, the refinery, local workers coming into town, buyers and sellers of the community while they're selling or buying a house. And we're helping this builder not keep his properties vacant, but offering additional housing mix to the market while he's selling these homes. I think that's very important. And by passing this moratorium, you actually restrict more housing to the builders that might need to rent them out temporarily while they're selling, just so they don't take a major loss. And our builders, we need to support and keep them building homes so we can alleviate this housing shortage. And by restricting what they can do with the properties if they're unable to sell is only going to further make the problem worse. So this moratorium is absolutely not called for. 20 units is not a reason to call a moratorium or help. If you guys want to plan, I'm more than happy to help. Or if you want to plan, you don't need a moratorium to stop people from renting. There's actually less Airbnbs this year in 2023 than was in 2022. So those are my main points. I just want to make sure, really, this moratorium should not be passed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gould. Anybody else before I close the public hearing on this subject? Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing on ordinance 4052 and then turn it over to council for discussion and possible action. Council.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleland.
Thank you for the work plan. I appreciate that, Ms. Grange. I've heard from a number of folks who would like to be able to give their thoughts on this. Could you recommend a good time? My sense is if we wait to hear from community members but when it's in the planning commission stage, that might be further along than it should be for the benefit of hearing from them. Can you kind of give a sense of how folks can put their 2 cents in and when that should happen?
Sorry about that. Sure. People can send comments if they have general thoughts. At this point, feel free to send them to me via email. Once we have the draft proposal put together, we will do a notice that gets sent out to our normal department planning email address so people can sign up to be notified about that. And then also we will bring that to City Council, so it will be on a meeting agenda, hopefully around summertime, May through August.
And the idea, if I read the work plan correct, is to, if council has, or we have some draft language for which areas may or may not have the moratorium continue. So that's kind of what you're asking, to make sure that there's opportunity for the public to weigh in on those various options. And yeah, it seems like the May-August timeframe.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton and then Mr. Walters.
I also appreciate the work plan. This is something that we've been talking about for several years on planning committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue the moratorium and move the work plan forward so we can really ensure that it does what we want it to do. So thank you.
Mr. Walters.
Yes, thank you for the bullet in September. Inclusion of a briefing of City Council and the public on the preliminary draft proposal before then we start the formal process of Planning Commission review and Department of Commerce review. I wanted to provide just some background to our audience as to why it is we're doing this. In 2019, we adopted a whole bunch of new development regulations, basically started over from a blank sheet of paper, and it enables more height and some more density in our commercial zones, which we now call mixed-use zones. So the Commercial Avenue zone, the downtown core, the marine mixed-use zone, which is where the MJB development is going. People, as a general matter, aren't particularly excited about additional height, and the reason that we approved it was to achieve more housing, because we are very much aware, and it's not reasonably up for debate, that there is a housing crisis locally, statewide, regionally, and nationally. So we wanted to do our part that way, and we wanted to benefit the local economy and the local housing ecosystem by making available to people more housing of different sizes, types, and styles, so that they could live downtown, that they could live when maybe they're not able to live in a single-family residence anymore as they age out, but still want to age in our community. And we wanted to provide that diversity to people. What we didn't want to see is people build tall structures, eat up our skyline with buildings that aren't trading for that benefit of housing. So if a building is built and becomes short-term rentals, it's not a particularly efficient use of land for the purpose of overnight lodging. A hotel would be a more efficient use of land for that. And it creates the potential of having even more vacant properties. Certainly agree that vacant houses are not a benefit to the city of Anacortes. We don't have the ability to levy a vacancy tax on vacant parcels, but vacant houses and vacant parcels don't add to our community. They're not occupied, they don't add to economic activity, they don't add to cultural activity. We do want to avoid that. So we moved forward this moratorium because this was a hole in our development regulations. In 2019, we adopted a permanent prohibition on short-term rentals in our residential zones. And so only the short-term rentals that pre-existed that 2019 action are allowed to continue. But the commercial zones were unaffected by that. So this plugs that gap. And it does so in a way such that there's public comment, there's opportunity to participate in the process of creating the permanent development regulations, but it also preserves the status quo while we're going through that process. So we have had a lot of discussions about housing. I think a lot of us on City Council are very supportive of getting the right mix of housing to support the people that live in Anacortes, the people that work in Anacortes and can't live in Anacortes. Travel nurses do need housing in Anacortes now, but the reason we have travel nurses is because our nurses can't afford housing in Anacortes. So we have a long way to go still before we have sufficient housing for our population and for our working population. And anything that we can do to get out of our own way that way is something that we need to pursue. So unless others want to weigh in, and feel free afterward, I move approval of the ordinance as presented.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Hubick to approve approve ordinance 4052, extending the moratorium adopted by ordinance 4046 and adopting a work plan. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Hubick.
I also want to say thank you to staff. I know that this is going to take a lot of work, and I also want to point out that the timing on this is really good. This is going to coincide with the Housing Action Plan, the Growth Management Act update that we're working on, the comp plan, all of these things that we are required to do by the state and that we have the obligation to do for our residents that live within our city limits and the guests that come here. Really, really appreciate the effort that's come into this. Fixing the housing crisis that we have is not going to be a one option fix. It's going to take a lot of conversation. It's going to take a lot of plans and a lot of patience. So, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Hubick. Ordinance 4052. Mr. Franciac, will you take the vote, please?
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7, this is a closed record decision hearing. Closed record decision hearing for conditional use permit 2023-001, Fifth Street Retreat Bed and Breakfast. This is a discussion item with possible action. And closed record decision means people who are already parties of record will be able to comment. And Ms. Pollard, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, members of the public, I'm Grace Pollard, Senior Planner with the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, and I am presenting an application for a proposed bed and breakfast. This is a closed record decision hearing, and the following presentation is a quick overview of information provided in the agenda packet. The property owners and applicants, Gregory Smith and Denise Herman Smith, own property at 1303 Fifth Street, which is in the Old Town Zone. They are proposing a single room bed and breakfast within their existing residence. And in the Old Town Zone, that would mean a conditional use permit is required. The applicants have been issued a building permit for interior remodel, but no proposed changes to the structure's footprints or additions or anything like that is proposed for the bed and breakfast use, nor is anything required. Under the Anacortes Municipal Code, Anacortes Municipal Code, Chapter 19.41, all short-term lodging rentals are grouped under the overnight lodging category. All overnight lodging types, except for bed and breakfasts, are prohibited in residential zones. And establishing a bed and breakfast in a residential zone is either an outright permitted use or is only permitted by way of a conditional use permit. You can see here in this table, copied from the code, that the subject property located in the Old Town Zone requires a conditional use permit to establish a bed and breakfast. Conditional use permit is a type 4 city council decision. The review process began with a pre-application meeting with city staff, moved on to a pre-application neighborhood meeting. There was a notice of application published and mailed out, 21-day public comment period, review by city departments. There was a pre-decision open record public hearing with the Planning Commission on May 10th, and now here we are at the closed record decision hearing. Requirements of operating a bed and breakfast within city limits include that the owner must be the operator of the facility and must reside on the premises. All sleeping rooms, including the owners as well as the guests, must be within the main residential building. And in residential zones, it's required that the property have no outward appearance of a business. Parking must meet the standards of Anacortes Municipal Code, Chapter 19.64, which states 1 parking space per guest room be provided on-site for the bed and breakfast guests. Through the application submittal process, property owners and the applicants have acknowledged these requirements. Here is a vicinity map of the subject property. The lot is center in the image and is located on the southwest corner of 5th Street and M Avenue.
The adjacent uses consist mostly of other single-family residences, with one fourplex located to the west. The subject property is a few blocks from Commercial Avenue, Causland Park, Guemus Ferry. Here we have a zoning map of the vicinity. The properties to the east, south, and west share the same zoning designation as the subject property, while the properties to the north across Fifth Street are zoned light manufacturing. The subject property was developed in 1952. It's elevated above street level by roughly 6 feet and contains a stone retaining wall around both street frontages and along the majority of the alley side. The residence was developed with a basement garage. However, the property currently does not have an existing curb cut providing vehicular access from the public street to the site, providing the formal off-street parking, nor has there been any existing parking areas off the alley. Staff has determined that the single residential dwelling unit has pre-existing non-conforming parking. Here are a couple before and afters. Going back to the bed and breakfast requirements, it is still established, or it is still required that one off-street parking space be established and maintained, and there is just enough room to do that off the alley. Here is a photo also just demonstrating that there has not been an actual driveway connection or curb cut from the basement garage to the street. Per the Anacortes Municipal Code, to grant a conditional use permit, members of the council must find that the use would be consistent with the CUP criteria. Based upon the submitted application materials, findings and conclusions of the staff report, and the additional findings of fact and conclusions by Planning Commission, all of which I'd be happy to go into more detail if council would like. Staff supports the Planning Commission's recommendation to approve the conditional use permit with the revised conditions outlined in the Planning Commission's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations, which state, 1, the applicant must submit revised site plan showing the required parking for the bed and breakfast use for the final review and approval by the Planning Department. Number 2, a new single-car parking pad must be installed on-site off the alley to accommodate the use of a single guest room bed and breakfast. The property must maintain one off-street parking space required to be dedicated to the bed and breakfast use. And the final condition of approval, the applicant must obtain a City of Anacortes business license prior to operating the bed and breakfast use. That concludes my presentation, unless council would like to go over any other details or has questions.
All right, thank you. And are there any other parties of record besides the applicant?
There were not.
Okay. All right, council. Questions?
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pollard. I just would like to say how much I appreciate your presentation, the maps, and with the zoning and the streets, so we know exactly where it is and what's happening around it. That's super helpful.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Walters.
I think that I am generally happy with the revised direction here. Avoiding another curb cut is probably desirable. And one off-street parking space seems like it's likely to be enough for a single guest bedroom bed and breakfast use. Of course, the corollary is where do the other occupants of the dwelling park. But it is true that people park on M Avenue to achieve traffic calming on M Avenue, which is a separate problem we need to solve. So my quibble, though, is with condition number 2. It says a new single-car parking pad must be installed on-site off the alley. I think we should press period at the end of that portion of that, and then separately state that the bed and breakfast use is a single guest room bed and breakfast use. Because I think that Those are two separate concepts that we're trying to express and should be in two separate sentences. Does that make sense to you, Ms. Pollard?
No, could you say that again?
So condition 2 says that a new single-car parking pad must be installed on-site off the alley to accommodate the new use. What I would like is it to be very clear that the new use is allowed only for a single guest room bed and breakfast.
Oh, understood, okay.
So splitting that sentence into two sentences, I think, makes it clear that those are two separate concepts. And it's not that just the one car pad is for this bedroom, and if there's a different bedroom, then you add more car. No, it's limited to one bedroom. That's consistent with the intent, right?
Yes.
Okay. That is all I had. Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Hearing no other discussion, I would move that we approve the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation of the Planning Commission for this with that one modification, that condition 2 be split into two sentences as described.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Hubick to approve the conditional use permit 2023001 with the amended conditions as stated by Mr. Walters in condition item number 2, and with the other conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission. Any additional comments? Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Next up is we're on to item 8, which is other business. First item is 8A, a contract award 2023 Fidalgo Avenue waterline replacement. Mr. Hash has already made it up to the podium. Mr. Hash.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Council, and the audience. Henry Hash, Public Works. Tonight before you, we have two agenda items. They're very routine work that we do on a yearly basis. They generally would be on the consent, but because they're a bit over $200,000, we have them on non-consent and they're separate. So the first one is the Fidalgo Avenue water line replacement. As you know, we do have a water line replacement program. We have about $1.4 million a year for that. And different time we go out to bid for different locations, and this is just one of them. We went out to bid. In this case, we were fortunate to receive 7 bids, and the lowest bid was selected, and that is why, and there was Raw Land Construction. They were responsible low bid, and the low bid was within our engineering estimate, actually very good estimate for both of these projects, for the amount of $279,093.76. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. There's a little map in your packet. Basically, this is on Fidalgo Avenue between Hillcrest Drive and O Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hash, and just if we could know for the record, Ms. Franciac, that Mr. Carter has joined the meeting. Okay, any questions for Mr. Hash on the water line replacement project? All right, any motions then, perhaps?
Miller.
Ms. Hubick?
I move that City Council authorize the mayor to sign contract 23-035-WTR-001 with Raw Land Construction LLC in the amount of $279,093.76 for the 2023 Fidalgo Avenue water line replacement project.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Hubick, a second by Ms. Cleveland McGrath to authorize the signature of contract with Raw Land Construction LLC as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Walters, Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and Mr. Hash stays at the podium for our next contract, 2023 chip seal project, 23140, TRN 001. And this discussion, possible action. Mr. Hash.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item is our chip sealing. We have list of roads here, Q Avenue, O Avenue, N, 37th and Longview Avenue. We went out to bid. We received one bid, but fortunately it was one good, responsible bid at a very good price. And Doolittle Construction is the low bid. The contract amount, the low bid was for $322,190, and our engineering estimate was $320,000. That's a very, very good engineering estimate. And unless there are any questions, I would request your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hash. And yes, I will highlight once again, those are good engineering estimates. It's always nice to see when they fall in pretty good. So hats off to your folks for getting in the ballpark. Any questions? Ms. Moulton?
Mayor Miller? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hash. I just had a question about the pedestrian improvements that have been reviewed, and any required improvements will be completed prior to placement of asphalt and chip seal. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, yes, we actually have it. The bid that will be open this Thursday, that is before we do the chip sealing, because chip sealing alone does not have the ability of leveling roads. So we have another contract to go level the roads before the chip sealing takes place. So that means.
Okay, so my question also is that, so Q Avenue is relatively unimproved, and this will obviously improve it. One of my concerns when we improve streets is that it makes them less safe for pedestrians because people feel free to drive faster. So can you speak to that at all? I still don't, and I'm sorry, I probably should have emailed you earlier to ask you this, so I wouldn't just surprise you with this, but yeah, so can you speak to that at all?
I can try. We're not proposing to widen the street in any way. We're just chip sealing and leveling and chip sealing. All the existing line, the crosswalks and everything will be put back in place. So we don't see a reason for drivers to speed up because the road is newly chip sealed. But this is also the area that we are constantly monitoring. In fact, we have submitted for a grant. There was some safety improvement in Q Avenue area as well. So we're being monitoring as grants become available. We are applying for them, and we have been very, fortunate receiving a lot of grants. So that's, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, that is helpful. And I'm just going to point out, I appreciate this map too, that the street is not paved between 29th and 28th. That's like a pedestrian bike path. And I think that is one of the reasons that it keeps it from being a major thoroughfare that people speed on, like compared to O Avenue, for example.
Yes.
So I just want to say for the record, I would love it if we do not punch the street through there because it makes it less desirable as a high-speed way to get north or south through that residential neighborhood. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters?
We have talked a couple of times at our Public Works Committee about this project, about the chip seal with the fog seal on top of it in this area. What project are we opening bids for on Thursday? What's that component?
On Thursday,
Yeah.
that's the leveling part before chip
Only
seal.
leveling?
Only leveling.
Okay, so just a purely mechanical component.
Correct.
So there's no additional pedestrian improvements
Correct.
as a result of any of that?
Yes.
Okay. So my concern, which I will reiterate, is that these streets, while they are not in great shape, are not necessarily at the top of anyone's list that I'm familiar with for additional work. And it seems to me quite likely that, and it's mentioned in the cover memo, that this area will likely see development in the next 10, 20 years. It is primed for that, I think, as the cover memo says. And with development come street improvements. And this is a relatively small amount of money. $300,000 generally doesn't get you very much in the public works arena. So we're doing a lot more with that money, but we're also not obtaining a normal street asphalt because it's chip seal with the fog seal. And it just strikes me that this is not where I'd be inclined to spend that money. I think I prefer to do other residential streets that are less likely to get redeveloped, thus less likely to get private investment in the street, where we have, you know, some real problems. Do you have any commentary on that?
Sure. If I may, I understand there are two reasons. The chip sealing is not the same as asphalt, but it does add to the life of the roads. But 5 to 7 years, and it will be about 5 to 7 years for really development to take place. At that time, then we will reconsider and reassess whether we need to do different method. Also, when you are doing road improvement, sometimes people see some roads that may be not in a very bad condition, and that is good because we don't want to go completely down. So we simply do not have enough money in our budget for reconstruction. This time, reconstruction of one road is equal to a budget of 5 years that we have. So what we can do is try to prevent them from further failing, and chip sealing is a very good way of doing it. We have a pavement management program, and they have all the ratings in there, and based on those ratings, these roads are selected to be chip sealed. We understand it's, well, I wouldn't call it really temporary, it's a 5 to 7 years good lifespan at less than half a price.
So I appreciate that logic. I do think that we need to have a more comprehensive and in-depth discussion about our pavement management program, because such as it is, it doesn't tell us how we get to the standard of pavement management that our community expects. And if the missing link in that program is X additional dollars, then we need to know what that X is, so that we can determine, can we achieve X? Can we achieve half of X? We need to be able to figure out what we can achieve with what we have, what we can achieve if we could supplement that, and then almost certainly how we can make the problem smaller so that we can actually achieve the standard that people expect. And we really need to have that conversation very near term before next year's pavement program. Because this is a little different than what we've done in the past, because it's the chip seal with the fog seal. But, and maybe it's worth trying out, but we still should not commit to that as a long-term course of action without a whole plan wrapped around. So I look forward to that discussion in the next 12 months.
Yes, we agree, as we have discussed, and we are in the process of really putting a very comprehensive plan together for the entire city, come up not only for location, but method of treatment, and that would become also a budget/policy decision. Our plan is to come to you, Mayor Council, to present to you for all the projects and the money that attached to it for the next 10 years. Then really at that point, you can decide how do you want to do it. Do you want to accomplish it in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending on your decision we adjust the budget accordingly. That is our plan, not only for our roads, as well as for our facilities, all the city-owned buildings, same. Yes.
Okay, any other discussion or questions from Mr. Hash? I know it's going to be a busy area over there because I'm thinking the R Avenue improvements as well coming along. So, any other questions? All right, entertain any motions?
Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Do you have an engineer's estimate for the leveling work that you're opening bids for? Order of magnitude?
As today, I believe it's $700,000.
$700,000 for the leveling work.
Leveling, not only these roads, but Fidalgo Bay Road that we're also planning to chip seal later in the year, that's going to be part of it as well.
Okay, so then it's not a $300,000 project.
For this,
Right.
this is just the chip sealing part.
Yeah, but the component, the leveling component of this scope of work, what do we think that cost is? Is it close to $700,000?
No, if I can only do my best guess for right now, for this would be maybe around 200,000.
Okay, so this is more like a $500,000 scope, all in.
Potentially.
And
I
depending on
can
what
give
the
you
bids
better.
come back, right.
I'll give you a very accurate answer after Thursday.
Right.
Once we open the bids.
Okay. That dampens my enthusiasm a little bit more.
Okay. We will spend all the 2.4 million that you've been kindly giving us and then some this year.
Okay, so I'm still looking for a motion or some direction about where you want to go with this contract. Okay, since Mr. Walters.
So for $500,000, there are quite a number of streets that will see some improvement, and this area between Commercial and R Avenue will see an improvement. And while we expect new development in that area, it's not going to happen overnight. We must get to this question of the grand unifying theory of how we're doing pavement management. So I'll move this one forward, or at least make that motion now, but we've got to get to it very quickly. And we don't really have the 12 months that I mentioned before, because in 12 months we'll be here approving another contract, so it needs to be more on the 6-month timeline, so then staff spends the following 6 months developing the project. Anyway, I move the City Council authorize contract 23-140 TRN 001 as presented.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Ms. Hubick to authorize signature on contract 23-140 TRN 001, Doolittle Construction LLC in the amount of $322,190. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac. Additional discussion, Ms.
Yeah.
Cleland.
Well, I would just say that I share the concern with Mr. Walters. I think that these streets are being scrutinized a bit more than others in different parts of town, just because we know the density between Commercial and R Avenue that exists currently, and the fact that those two, they're kind of those blocks are sandwiched between really high volume roads. I also think that we're seeing 34th, 35th, and 36th seeing continued infill and density in those areas. So I'm fine moving this forward. I think that you're getting more scrutiny because 5 to 7 years isn't that long, but we also know that chances are it's not going to be re-looked at in 7 years, right? And the importance of us being creative with how to have pedestrian connectivity through these neighborhoods is kind of the part that makes me kind of pause. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional discussion, Mr.
Mayor
Walters?
Maybe to restate it a little bit more plainly than I have, there's so much work to be done in this corridor between Commercial Avenue and R Avenue, because there's been so much odd little bits of development over time where we didn't end up with a sidewalk, where we ended up with a bunch of curb cuts or a wide curb cut, or there's a gutter, a ditch instead of a gutter. There's so much work to be done, and this doesn't really advance the ball on any of that. All it does is give us another coating on these streets, which extends the longevity. I take that point. But it also spends some money that could be going elsewhere where there's less likely to have all those additional needs. So I think that is really the crux of this concern. You know, putting a Band-Aid on it, I guess, is useful because it helps stop the bleeding. But there's so much more to be done, and we want to be thinking bigger.
Yeah, I think, see, it's a little more, it's a really important holding action as well. Okay, so there is additional discussion. Ms. Moulton.
Okay, I just have to pipe in one more time. Thank you. So that Q Avenue is also considered a Q Avenue bikeway, sort of informally, sort of formally, not well known, I guess I'll say. So if I'm coming down from Whistle Lake or the south end of town, I will cut right off Commercial to avoid commercial traffic to then get onto Q Avenue and then cruise all the way down to 20th Street, basically. Or then can go out to the Tommy Thompson at the roundabout at 22nd, or you can take a left. So it's a really, really great option currently for non-motorized travel, and I would like to see it continue to be that. And that's where my hesitation is with, like, let's improve the street but not improve the pedestrian or bikeability. When I think of maybe potentially marginalizing the non-motorized users, because I think it's great for kids and anyone else who wants to get north to south that way. So that's my nervousness expressed. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I do have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Ms. Hubick. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciak, take the vote, please.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Ms. Hubick?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion, and we're moving on to item 8C. It's a contract award, Ben Root Skate Park construction. And already there, Mr. Lunsford is ready to go. Mr. Lunsford, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. There we go. Mr. Vokes, our Assistant Director and the Project Manager, is going to take this first half on the construction and questions you might have about the contract.
Thank you, John. Mayor Miller, members of the council, members of the audience, it's great to be here to present this contract on a very exciting park project. As is pretty clearly laid out in the cover sheet, we'd like to enter into a contract with Janicki General Contracting to build a new skate park, or to upgrade the skate park and to add a pump track, just like we're displaying here in this pretty picture. Couple of the things, some good news right off the bat is because we're continuing to work with the folks just south of us, which is MJB and the possible community center, we are able to knock this down about $200,000 because we're not going to build the parking lot. And That's why it was in there as an additive alternative number 1. So that gets us down to just a little over 1.5. As you know, I think some of you were actually at the meetings. We did some great community planning a year ago. Grind line construction, skateboard park builders extraordinaire, nationally renowned, were here. Went through the planning with us. Janicki hired them as their sub, so that's what gave Janicki all their qualifications they needed to build a skate park. It's a combination of a very local company that has a great history in obviously community support and building parks, and so the combination of Janicki and Grindline is a great one. Not only are we going to get a skate park improvement, but we're, after honestly almost 30 years of trying to locate a pump track in Anacortes, we're finally going to be able to do that. And doing it so close to the community center, this could really turn into a major hub of community activity. One of the great things about the skate park and the pump track is that tends to serve populations that don't always sign up for our more traditional programming, so it really helps us diversify who we're serving and provide outlets for people who don't often want to be anywhere else other than maybe on their board or on their bike. So we're super excited about this. I know that both Janicki and Grindline are very excited about it. Grindline feels like they're getting back to their roots on this project. I still am learning what that means exactly, but we did have a great pre-construction meeting the other day. We're looking at probably getting rolling here just after the 4th of July, and Janicki is pretty sure they can get it built in 3 months. So that's very exciting. You know, this dream started with Rachel Montine Salazar, who's, you know, owns a small business and is kind of the Pied Piper of the young skaters in town. She did an exciting thing today that John's going to talk to you about here next. But other than that, we're rolling forward, and we're excited about it. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
All right. Any questions right up front? Mr. Walters.
I completely agree. This is an exciting project. The facility to the south that we're working on designing, and I'm on that committee, is I think properly characterized as a youth center, not all community, but
sure.
Youth. And that is what makes it work so well with its adjacency to the skate park. And so we're excited about that, and almost to the point at which we've got floor plan drawings and those kinds of things that we could share with the public near term. Obviously the parking lot is a common component and a critical component, but you know, you got to sequence these things somehow, and I think it makes sense to build it with that next phase of this development, the youth center. So I'm okay with that, and I feel fairly confident that our skateboard users will find their way here even if there isn't a parking lot. Ben Root is my predecessor on the city council in this seat, and he was the father of a good friend of mine. So I'm pleased that we're keeping the name associated with the new park. Also really pleased that we're doing this upgrade because it is important. I mean, there are problems with the existing park. In some ways, it's sort of a hazard for its users. So this is going to be a much improved amenity. I think that this is maybe not the most current graphic. Are we still showing that connection to the trail and the sidewalk configured this way?
So the trail connection is pretty legit. The sidewalk connection, there's still, you know, the whole R Avenue sidewalk improvement project, and I'd be lying to you if I could tell you exactly how that's going to play out rolling through, but it's going to be between the developed skate bowl and the pump track and R Avenue. You know, probably the current controlled crossing there is going to get pushed south that comes from, you know, across R Avenue. So that'll move down, but The reason we've got, it ended up so straight, kind of perpendicular to the Tommy Thompson, is people were concerned about approach and departure being too fast.
Oh, so that's how we resolved it.
So we had 100 different ideas, and then somebody said, well, why don't you just make it perpendicular so they have to slow down? I mean, obviously, they're going to make shortcuts across the grass. We know that, but we can deal with that with plantings and different things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, did I mention there's going to be a lot of activity on our avenue and construction around that area?
And we've discussed that pretty thoroughly at our pre-construction meeting, and yeah, we're optimistic that we can all play nice together.
All right. And plan for the future at the same time.
Yeah.
Any other, Ms. Moulton?
Thank you. This is a tremendously exciting project for all age groups, really. And with the loss of the bowling alley and a lot of people asking, what can our kids do? This is a really great answer to that. And I have appreciated the process. I went to one of the community meetings where there was a lot of public input from young skaters, older skaters, moms, people who had been all over this country and really had great input on what really is going to work. So this has been very well vetted and very much a community process. So I'm very excited about this. One of the things I'm wondering, I know we've had some vandalism in our current park, and what do we think about that going forward, potential for that or prevention of that? Will that be sort of monitoring by the people that are there?
So yeah, so there's no more, being a veteran of the trails like you are, there's no more effective way to correct behavior than when groups do it themselves. And it's funny because I saw Rachel this morning and I was talking to her about graffiti, and I said, what do you see? And you know, she's already working on that. And so, you know, we've obviously, because we kind of knew this project was coming, we've let a lot of that go, and as long as it stayed in the bowl, and there was a few key items and terms that we would cover up, but we're optimistic that we are gonna put together such a beautiful facility, and the pride that the locals are gonna take in it is gonna prevent that. Now, I'm not gonna make an empty promise here that there's not gonna be any, but I can tell you that it's something that's already being talked about pretty seriously, both from the city standpoint and the potential user group.
Ms. Cleland? No? Okay. Okay, Mr. Lunsford, were you going to come back up, or are you going to let?
I don't have much more to add on this unless council has questions. I'm just here for the next one.
Okay. All right, so
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So in terms of the site plan here and construction sequencing, there's one missing component, and that, besides the parking lot, and that is restrooms. And the restrooms up north of the roundabout, for a variety of reasons, need to go away, principally because of MJB's new development there, but also because they're built in the right-of-way, and because restrooms in the current age need to be a little different than we built them 20 years ago, especially with respect to vandalism and homelessness and those kinds of things. So I would like to see the city figure that out very near term, get some restrooms put in place here, you know, well before the youth center gets built, which is still probably a couple years out. Resolve that problem of restrooms in the right-of-way, deal with the grant issue, and provide, of course, the facility to the users of the park. And what I had suggested in a number of contexts now is the Portland loo style stainless steel stall. It can be hosed out, and it doesn't provide a space where people want to hang out. And it seems to me that something like that, or maybe that, is what we ought to pursue there. So that's an additional expense, but you know, we do need to achieve a little bit more funding for this project, and I think that we ought to be thinking in those terms, and if people would like to fund that, we should be very willing to accept their donations and pitching it to them whenever we're having these conversations.
Excellent.
Okay, well, there's a contract before the council. Ms. Cleland.
I would just like to say thank you to the community who supported this project, and not only financially, but also like our amazing skateboarders and bike riders who wanted to see this happen and were incredibly involved. I've heard from a number of them, even in the last couple weeks, about how important this is to them and how their skills are passed down generation to generation. As I get older, I'm no longer a kid anymore, but I was also up at the pump track yesterday in Bellingham, and it was incredible because it wasn't just kind of what you expect teenagers. It was a ton of people that were my age with their 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds learning how to ride bikes. So I'm excited about the range of community members who can enjoy this project. So with that, I would like to move that City Council authorize the mayor to sign contract 22-043-PRK-002 with Janicki General Contracting LLC in the amount of $1,697,280 to perform the Ben Root Skate Park construction.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Cleland McGrath, a second by Mr. Walters to approve the contract as presented. Any additional discussion? And again, appreciate Mr. Walters.
So the 1.69, that includes the ad alternate for the parking lot?
That includes that, yes.
But we're not doing the parking lot, so is that the right amount?
Because, and this is something I'd have to defer to Tiffany for, because she's the expert on all this, but we can, the way the bid is structured, as it was bid as an additive alternative, it's easy to take that out.
Yeah.
So we're approving it, but you're going to immediately take it back out?
Exactly, and then we've got a couple other just details to work on with the contractor where some new edges would be without that parking lot being constructed.
Yeah, I will take council's approval as up to that amount, but we will plan to adjust accordingly based
Yep.
on this new information.
And the contract is well aware of that.
And again, I was just going to say to Ms. Cleland McGrath's point, again, we couldn't have done this without the community. This would never have happened, so appreciate again all the input that we've received. Okay, any other comments? Okay, Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to our next item, item 8D. Oh, and I guess this is what I was hinting about, the community help. Okay, ordinance 4050, accepting donations for the Ben Root Skate Park. This is a discussion item with some hopeful action. Mr. Lunsford.
I'll leave this pretty slide up because this is kind of what we're talking about. So this is where we would accept the donations because they are in excess of $10,000 for the requirements of the ordinance. So we would like to have you accept donations up to $1.6 million from the skate park improvement project. They're the ones, Ms. Montine that Mr. Vokes mentioned earlier. She and her compatriots have raised over $1 million to help us build this out of community generosity. They are still fundraising as we speak. They have a pledge-a-ledge, so you can help, like we did at the Our Town, Our Park at Storvik. You know, families or friends or community groups can donate towards naming items in the park. And so they are actively doing that. If you want to go to their skate park improvement project website, you can make donations. We're also partnering with the Parks Foundation. They've accepted funds, but the skate park improvement project is the main driver of this. So appreciate all their community support. I think it's been said quite well already from the dais and from Mr. Vokes how important that process has been and will be to what we're doing. So that's why I'm bringing the ordinance to you tonight for the support of that donation to the city. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Lunsford? Yeah, I think accepting funds is pretty much a no-brainer, but that's up to you, Council.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton?
I move to pass ordinance 4050, accepting the donations.
Second.
All right, we got a
He can have it.
motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Carter to approve ordinance 4050, accepting donations. Any additional discussion, Mr. Walters?
So for express clarity here, this authorizes acceptance up to 1.6 million, but we don't have that much prepared to come in the door at this moment, which is
Correct.
why everybody does need to go to anacortesskatepark.org to view the design, to view the timeline, to view the information about it, and consider a donation.
Well said, thank you.
Okay, any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Mr. Carter.
Yes, but also I think the second was by Mr. McDougall.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we'll,
It was, all good.
okay. We'll note that.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. I do not have any more agenda items. I will adjourn the city council meeting. Thank you.